Form or forms? The 13th century controversy over the substantial forms of the human person and its effects upon the conceptualization of the resurrection of the body and the cult of relics. There can be no denying that the doctrine of the resurrection of the body, surely that of Christ, but also in the general sense, holds a central and essential place in the corpus of Catholic belief and faith. Paul makes clear the necessity of Christ's resurrection and the vanity of the Christian life should it not have occurred. Yet, rarely is such belief subjected to a rational analysis, with questions asked regarding its inner dynamics, questions of how such a phenomena could take place, and what the nature of the body-soul union is in the person. But in our materialistic age, that also claims to prize the role of reason, it is fitting and subtly timely to consider in a rational fashion how it is that Christians hold that this material, that is part of who I am, will rise at the end of the age. Thankfully, theologians and philosophers throughout time have considered such questions. The end of the 13th century saw a moment of intense debate and grappling with questions and answers surrounding the topics of the substantial form or forms of the human person, the relation between body and soul, the implications for the resurrection of the body and the cult of relics. It is this moment in time and the broader understanding of the implications involved that is the subject of this paper. Historical context. As grappling with the concept and reality of the resurrection of the body had been of major import and consideration in the early church, so too had they been during, quote, the decades around 1300, which were a period of Christian history in which the relationship of body to self became the place where preachers, artists, theologians, and ordinary folk explored what they meant by salvation, end quote. The conversations of this time period regarding the resurrection of the body proved to be a point of intersection between impressive exercises of philosophical acumen with that of popular piety, as well as profound concerns over the theological implications of certain new syntheses of theological constructs with the works of Aristotle, typified in the work of Thomas Aquinas. So, it should be no surprise that standing at the center of the controversies addressed in this paper is the figure of Thomas Aquinas. Also at the center stand a number of Franciscans, and even another Dominican. A point of contention arising from Thomas's work would be his doctrine of the unicity of substantial form. Quote, although even before 1248, pluralists in Oxford like Grosseteste, Adam Marsh, and Thomas of York were combating the singularists. End quote. The chief critique of John Peckham, a Franciscan, and Richard Kilwardby, a Dominican, of this doctrine of the unicity of substantial form was that it afforded no satisfactory answer regarding the nature of the body of Christ in the tomb, and that it enervated the cult of relics and the veneration of the bodies of the saints. The controversies surrounding this issue and its implications were subject to public debate in Paris, in the presence of the bishop in 1270. As can be seen by mention of Kilwardby, the criticism of Thomas was not relegated to the Franciscans, but Dominicans too were part of the number attacking Thomas's unicity of substantial forms. During the debate in Paris, Peckham held that Thomas's teaching ran contrary to that of Augustine and Anselm. Concern over the new teachings of the time led to the Paris condemnations of March 7, 1277, which targeted over 200 propositions, the unicity of substantial form not being one of them, though. The theory would not have to wait long for condemnation, though, for on March 18, 1277, condemnations were issued at Oxford at the behest of Kilwardby, then the Archbishop of Canterbury. While not labeling the condemned propositions as heretical, Kilwardby considered them dangerous. Peckham succeeded Kilwardby as head of the See of Canterbury, and in turn he too condemned the notion of the unicity of substantial form in 1284. By this time Thomism had been approved in the Dominican order, though. This fact, however, did not deter Peckham from going even further, for in April of 1286 he once more prohibited the theories in question, including the unicity of the substantial form, this time designating them as heretical. Also condemned by Peckham was an implication of formal identity, equivocality. In this he argued that equivocality denied that the living and dead bodies of Christ, the saints, and indeed all persons, were the same in number. And it is this issue that is of prime importance for the paper at present, the notion of the numerical identity between the living body of the saint and the dead body of the saint, or the corpse in the tomb. Such forceful opposition would not last long, as none of Peckham's successors would renew his condemnations, and the censors of Paris would revoke the prohibitions of 1277 in the year 1325. There was no such reneging in Oxford, but again there was no reiteration of Peckham's statements. By the early stages of the 14th century, Thomas was considered, quote, the common doctor, and, quote, the battle gradually came to an end, end quote. The concern of the present paper is found within the issue of the unicity of substantial form, particularly as regards the implications such a theory would have upon the belief in the resurrection of the body, the nature of the body of Christ in the tomb, and the cult of relics. With these concerns in mind, it should be clear that the form of the body, as a substantial form of the human person, is of the utmost import. This forma corporeitatis, and whether or not it constitutes an enduring substantial form in the person, is of prime importance for an understanding of the relationship between the living and dead bodies of persons. While at the center of this debate were questions concerning other possible substantial forms, such as the sensitive and vegetative souls, and perhaps even more. Our present concern is primarily with the possibility of the form of body being a separate and enduring substantial form of the person, aside or below the form of the intellective soul. That the intellective soul was the highest form of the person was not under serious debate at this time. The question was, are there other substantial forms under that of the intellective soul? These considerations were widely considered and contested in the late 13th century, which will be the period of time under consideration here. The conversations and debates would be found on both the continent and in England, and are of significance to understanding the bent and orientation of mind and heart found amongst the Franciscans of 13th century England. A historical postscript. One might question the appropriateness of subjecting the phenomenon of the resurrection of the body to philosophical investigation. This, the resurrection, so the reasoning might go, is a supreme act of God's intervention, and therefore not subject to laws of nature, and therefore difficult to consider in a philosophical fashion. In fact, this very notion can be found in a guide to examination composed by a Parisian master of arts from the 1230s. Furthermore, such a proposition was included among those condemned at Paris in 1277. While this is not necessarily a heretical position, it certainly suggests that philosophy is wanting in its address to the reality of the resurrection of the body. This paper, however, holds firm to the supposition that philosophical inquiry can, to a significant degree, penetrate the reality of the resurrection of the body, and that misguided philosophical reasoning can damage the understanding of such a reality and attending concerns such as the cult of relics.